All right, it's Friday, January 31st, 2025, and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence will be voting on Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel's confirmation later today after Tulsi made it abundantly clear why she's such a threat to the status quo in Washington. One exchange in particular, which I missed yesterday, but I have it for you today, an exchange between Tulsi and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly is a must-see for every American citizen. If you want to know why they're working so hard to stop her confirmation, this clip explains it all. We're going to show you also a major bombshell about J6 was revealed yesterday, or confirmed rather yesterday, implicating Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And new polling just out from Quinnipiac University showing Democrats are more unpopular than they've ever been. In fact, the most unpopular political party in American history. Wait till you see this. But before we get started, thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It really helps out the channel. And consider subscribing so you don't miss these regular updates. Tulsi Gabbard survived her Senate hearing yesterday in front of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, being grilled for 3 full hours. And unlike most nominees who receive cover from their own side every 5 minutes, a senator from their own side of the aisle will ask questions, normally helping them out. Not yesterday, not Tulsi Gabbard. Republicans and Democrats teamed up on her, hammering her with question after question after question, like Susan Collins, for instance, from Maine, a Republican, actually accusing her of being an asset of Hezbollah. You can't make this up. An active lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army being an asset of Hezbollah. Watch this.
Have you ever knowingly met with any members, leaders, or affiliates of Hezbollah?
No, and it is an absurd accusation.
This was unlike any confirmation hearing I've ever seen. You rarely see both sides of the aisle ganging up like this, and the questions they ask, clearly, in my view, prepped by the IC on what to ask. These questions likely came directly from the CIA. Remember, this was the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. This is the committee that serves as the official oversight body in Congress to the IC. So why? Why is the intel community so scared of Tulsi Gabbard? Why are both sides of the aisle trying their hardest to quash her nomination? Well, it turns out while she was serving as the Congresswoman for Hawaii's 2nd District in 2013, 2014, 2015, she was briefed on some of the Obama administration's covert Middle East missions, what the Obama administration was really up to in Syria. And what she learned in those briefings horrified her, and she unabashedly did her job, informed us, the American people, about what was really going on, what our government was really doing in our name, that the CIA under the Obama administration was funding Islamist extremist groups like Al-Qaeda, even helping to create some of these groups, all in an effort to regime change the Syrian government. This is something you'll probably remember her saying over and over again in the 2015, 2016 presidential debates with Hillary Clinton. And a U.S. Congresswoman spilling the beans, actually telling the truth, scares the living hell out of them. Watch this.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Gabbard, when Russia was denying us use of chemical weapons, they accused the U.S. of supporting terrorists. This is a line that Putin used frequently during the Syrian civil war as he supported Assad. Syrian officials made similar comments. They did it repeatedly. They did it in public. They did it at the United Nations. In 2016, you gave an interview in which you said, and this is a quote, "The U.S. is providing direct and indirect support to terrorist groups in order to overthrow the Syrian government." And in 2019, on the Democratic presidential debate stage, you said of President Trump, this is a quote, "This current president is continuing to betray us. We were supposed to be going after al-Qaeda, but over years now, not only have we not gone after al-Qaeda, our president is supporting al-Qaeda." So I'm interested to hear, what was your goal in saying these things? And did you consider, before saying them, the motives of Iran and Russia, what their motives might have been before making these claims?
Senator, as someone who enlisted in the military specifically because of Al-Qaeda's terrorist attack on 9/11 and committing myself and my life to doing what I could to defeat these terrorists, it was shocking and a betrayal to me and every person who was killed on 9/11, their families and my brothers and sisters in uniform. When, as a member of Congress, I learned about President Obama's dual programs that he had begun really to overthrow the regime of Syria, and being willing to, through the CIA's Timber Sycamore program that has now been made public, of working with and arming and equipping Al-Qaeda in an effort to overthrow that regime, starting yet another regime change war in the Middle East. DoD train and equip program, again, begun under President Obama, is widely been known, looked at, and studied, that ultimately resulted in over $500 million being used to train who they called moderate rebels, but were actually fighters working with and aligned with Al-Qaeda's affiliate on the ground in Syria, all to move forward with their regime change and not acknowledging what was obvious at the time and what has unfortunately borne true, which was that a regime change war in Syria, much like the regime change wars in Iraq, the toppling of Gaddafi and Mubarak, while these are all dictators, would likely result in the rise of Islamist extremists like Al-Qaeda taking power. I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, but today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
It shouldn't
is
be.
certainly
And I
not in our
understand, and
interests.
I appreciate your answer, and thank you. My concern has to do with the tendency to repeat Russian and Syrian, and even in some cases, I think we'll get into in the closed session, Iranian information, and to discount what comes from our intelligence community.
Senator, every American deserves to know that people in our own government were providing support to our sworn enemy, Al-Qaeda. That should not be acceptable by anyone.
Thank you.
Just think about this for a minute. Tulsi was in Congress for 8 years. In those 8 years, after learning about the Obama administration's covert policy to prop up Al-Qaeda, to fund them in the Middle East, to use them to overthrow Syria's government, which, by the way, Syria's government, Bashar al-Assad, just was overthrown like 2 months ago, right at the end of the Biden administration. Well, Tulsi unabashedly told the American people the truth, something no other member of Congress has done. Now, imagine what she'll learn as DNI. The Director of National Intelligence is this country's top intel officer. She would have TS/SCI clearance and a need to know. That's important. She would have a need to know to be read into any black project she wants, because TS/SCI, even if you have that clearance level, you could still only be read into what you have a need to know on. Well, as DNI, she has a need to know on everything. That makes her extremely dangerous. Watch this.
The fact is, what truly unsettles my political opponents is I refuse to be their puppet. I have no love for Assad or Gaddafi or any dictator. I just hate Al-Qaeda. I hate that we have leaders who cozy up to Islamist extremists, minimizing them to so-called rebels. As Jake Sullivan said to Hillary Clinton, quote, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Well, Syria is now controlled by an Al-Qaeda offshoot, HTS, led by an Islamist jihadist who danced in the streets on 9/11 and who was responsible for the killing of many American service members.
In another story, we learned some amazing new information about why the National Guard wasn't deployed to the Capitol on J6, something that the media and Dems have told us for years was the fault of who? Donald Trump. Tried pinning that on Donald Trump, that the National Guard wasn't there because Trump wanted to carry out his insurrection, quote unquote. It turns out that was a complete lie, which we've reported on before, but yesterday It was confirmed by a sitting U.S. senator on the Intel Committee, which Trump has been saying since it happened. In fact, days in advance of J6, President Trump was sitting in the Oval Office with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he ordered 20,000 National Guard troops to deploy to the Capitol for J6, a direct order from the President of the United States. So why weren't they deployed? Trump ordered that they deploy. It turns out that the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, sent a declination order to Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and the Sergeant of Arms, or the Sergeant in Arms. Why in the hell would they do that? Why would Muriel Bowser, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer not want the National Guard's help on J6, even after they learned that there was going to be this massive rally taking place? I wonder why. If there was ever a smoking gun, this is it. Watch.
What were you doing on that day?
On that day specifically, responding to preparing to mobilize and deploy the National Guard once we got the lawful request from the local governing authority, which was the mayor of D.C. and the Speaker of the House.
Now, how many days in advance were you working to prepare the Department of Defense to help secure the Capitol on January 6th?
Days in advance, Senator, we were in the Oval Office on an unrelated national security matter with the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and myself. And the President authorized up to 20,000 plus National Guardsmen and women to secure any security measures necessary related to the Capitol. So we were moving to the fullest extent of the law before the requisite request came from a local governing authority days ahead of time.
And while you were Chief of Staff at DOD, how many times did DOD approach Capitol Police and ask if they needed National Guard assistance?
I believe those letters are well documented, numerous instances, and in numerous of those instances, those requests were shut down.
Now, am I correct that the Capitol Sergeant at Arms said assistance was unnecessary?
That's correct, Senator.
Who did the Sergeant at Arms report to?
The Speaker of the House.
That would have been Nancy Pelosi at the time. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And would that also be Chuck Schumer, then the Senate Majority Leader?
The Sergeant at Arms, yes, Senator, reports up there.
Did Mayor Bowser, the Democrat elected mayor in D.C., either request or allow National Guard assistance?
She put in writing on the days leading up to January 6th a declination for National Guard additional support. And that letter is available publicly to the world.
So, and just to speak English for folks at home, a declination meant she said no, don't send National Guard. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you a simple question, because from the questioning from my Democrat colleagues, they might think otherwise. Do you condemn violence against law enforcement?
All of it.
In another story, Quinnipiac University released a new poll this week showing the Democratic Party is the most unpopular political party in American history since polling began. 57% of registered voters have an unfavorable opinion of the Democratic Party, while only 45% of voters have an unfavorable opinion of the Republican Party. That makes the Democrats the most unpopular political party ever in American history. And this isn't an anomaly. CNN conducted a poll with SSRS 2 weeks ago and obtained similar results. Their poll showed 58% of Democrats, of Democrat-leaning independent voters and full-on Democratic voters, are unhappy with their party and say that it needs major changes or needs to be completely reformed. Good riddance. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is at the apex of his popularity. CNN reporting this week that Trump is the most popular two-term president in American history. Watch this.
This is a very different Donald Trump. He's leading a very different administration, the way he's attacking things, and the American public is very much more in line with him than they were at any point during his entire first term.
Well, I would say, correction, this is not a very different Donald Trump. This is a very different Donald Trump as being viewed by voters in this
in the
moment.
way he's going about things with Susan Wiles leading things. I think he is, going at things in a much less disorganized fashion, much more organized.
Take me back in history.
Take you back in history. So it was so interesting to me that Donald Trump's first net approval rating of his second term is higher than his entire first term. And I was interested, Has that ever happened? Has the second term net approval rating in the first month, have you ever had a higher rating than any net approval rating during the entire first term? Donald Trump is the only...
I have a really hard time believing this.
This is 100% true. I went back. I love spreadsheets. Donald Trump is the first guy ever whose net approval rating in the first month of his second term is higher than any rating that he had in an entire first term, Kate Baldwin. This is true. I don't make stuff up. The numbers are the numbers.
I believe you in nothing except when you have it in the wall, and then I believe everything you say.
In another story, Donald Trump continues cleaning house, firing a number of high-ranking FBI officials yesterday who were promoted by Christopher Wray in the past few months. We know of 6 confirmed high-ranking officials who Trump ordered to either resign, retire, or be fired no later than Monday, February 3rd, 2025, in just 3 more days. This is important because we know what the Obama administration did to Trump before leaving office, right? Hiring a ton and promoting all of those deep staters who worked against the first Trump administration for years. In another story, new SecDef Pete Hegseth has provided an update from his office yesterday on that horrible, devastating plane crash that happened above Reagan National Airport in D.C. 2 nights ago. SecDef Hegseth vowing total transparency to the American public as he continues to learn what caused this mid-air collision. As of this morning, we do know that the black boxes have been recovered from the wreckage. Here he was with his update. Let's watch this.
But I also wanted to give an update on the tragedy that happened last night here in Washington, D.C., and provide a little bit more information as we are actively working to investigate and understand what occurred and why. At about 8:48 last night, a UH-60 assigned to the U.S. Army Aviation Brigade in the Military District of Washington, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, collided tragically with a civilian airliner. The unit involved, the Army unit involved, was Bravo Company 12th Aviation Battalion at Fort Belvoir. It was an annual proficiency training flight. And when we look at the crew, and not all kin have been notified, so we're going to withhold ranks and names at this point. We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew, and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles. The 12th Aviation Battalion, as of now, is granted a 48-hour operational pause on contingency missions as what happened is reviewed, and a senior level aviation team, an investigative team from our Aviation Safety Center was deployed last night and already is in Washington, D.C. to investigate what's going on. We anticipate that the investigation will quickly be able to determine whether the aircraft was in the corridor and at the right altitude at the time of the incident. As I mentioned, next of kin notifications are ongoing. It's a tragedy, a horrible loss of life for those 64 souls on that civilian airliner, and of course, the 3 soldiers in that Black Hawk. They're in our prayers, their families and their communities. As people are notified, I can't imagine. And I know it's gone from a rescue mission to a recovery mission, and we're with all the first responders that are moving actively too. So at the Defense Department, our thoughts and prayers go out. We are actively investigating to find out what happened and why. And as we get updates, you will have them. God bless.
All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.